So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, can you see it? Are you seeing the presentation?
Yeah, I can see it. Everyone else, can you see it?
I can see it.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited to talk about the design systems. Actually, is something that I like very much about UI design. And I had the opportunity to make a design system from scratch already for two companies. And it's very interesting because in a way you are, I mean, design system is always evolving, always growing. But when you are one of the first ones creating components, this means it can, I don't know, in 20 years maybe the components would be there and they would be still using what you created in some sort of way, unless they do like a complete redesign that sometimes happens. But in general, when a product is growing, the design system grows with it, and the same rules that you said are still growing with them. So we will going to talk about what is a design system. To give a few, just I don't want to put a lot of text on this. I put a lot of examples, but I want to put a few definitions that I found interesting from very interesting authors that are basically the people who started all this concept. I'm going to talk about the basics, what you need to actually start one when you get to a company where they don't have anything at all regarding a design system. We're going to talk about atomic design, which is basically how you do your workload in when creating a design system, a methodology on how to start building from scratch. And in the end, I'm going to share a few links and references for all of you if you want to deep in your knowledge of what a design system is. Okay, so with that said, we're going to start. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about me. As Melanie said, I'm UX UI designer at a company that is called CodeSpread. It's basically a very early age startup. Probably it started around 8 months ago, but uh, they started hiring more people. At the beginning, there were three people, 3 persons. I don't know how to use the verb. And they started hiring developers and a designer just around last December. So as you can see, it's growing to a normal pace of a startup, but it's in a very early stage. And it's very interesting for building a design system because they had nothing. And because what happened specifically with CodeSpread is that they first hired developers and then they hired the designer, who is me. So this means that they start designing things without actually having a designer. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because I have a few examples to show. I just put here social media if you want to follow me, my LinkedIn and my Dribble portfolio. So you are very welcome to follow me, and if you have questions and then you want to chat in there, also share stuff you have done on your design systems, I would be very happy to. Okay, so let's start with the interesting stuff. What is a design system? And I want to address that these definitions, I took them from this design system handbook that was created by a foundation kind of thing, I don't know, institution. It's called Design Better, created by Envision. If you have heard of it, Envision is one of the first software products that start um, creating tools for designers. Even before Figma was popular, Envision was like the thing to use. Now there are more focus on rather than design tools, they have other things like how to share, like a Jamboard, like FigJam, these kind of things, and other things that are more meant to global teams, for example, or to remote teams. But still, there was a time where they were publishing a lot of things, and this is a very interesting book. They used to have it in these PDFs to people who was signing up to their newsletter, and I did, so I got a few of them. I think they stopped this, but it was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. But it's a very interesting handbook is kind of long, but if you can get it somewhere in the internet, I pretty much recommend it. And this is basically where I took the definition from, which basically says a design system is a collection of components. So it's different from, for example, in graphic design when you use a style guide or a brand manual, because it's specifically for components and you have to consider all the states of that component. We're going to see what I mean when we're talking about states of a component. But also, it gives standards for the developers that are developing the product per se, the front-end developers usually that are managing with all the how visually the product should look. And I read in one article in Medium, I don't remember by who, a phrase that for me was very interesting that says the design system is a teacher, it's not a police. Because sometimes we want the developers to follow the design system as you meant to, as you design it, but you should teach them how to use it, how to understand, how to download components, how to use the icons, from which libraries you are taking icons, what standard you're using and why, and let them explore themselves the documents of the design system instead of being police and going to them, no, this button is wrong because it's not following the design system and you should do it like this. I have, for example, in my job in CodeSpread, we had a front-end developer that joined kind of recently, and in the beginning he had to build something, and then he came to me and said, look, I did this screen with this button with these elements and these colors, what do you think? And I noticed that most of the things that he did were wrong according to the design system. So what I did is I showed him the documentation I had. I'm going to show a little bit of it. And I said, look, we had these color palettes that are in the design system, and I already checked like the contrast and the accessibility for them. So whenever you have a doubt, all you have to do is go into this document and check what is better for the task you are doing. For example, if you know it's a primary function, then you should use all the elements that are marked as primary, like the primary colors, the primary buttons, these kind of things. So I have here two examples of two design systems that I created. One was for a company that's called Bebia, that what we needed to do was, this is one of the things we started, was with the buttons for different states. We have the primary button and the secondary button, but as you can see in here, we have the default state, what happens when you hover over that button, what happens when you press that button, what happens when you're sending information and it's loading, what happens when it's disabled, just for one button. So all the components and all the elements you need to think about all these states. When you create a design system, you don't only create a button and then a secondary button and then an input form and then a text form and then, I don't know, some icons. You really need to think about all the use cases you will have along the way in advance. Now, this doesn't mean that starting from scratch you are going to have everything ready. You will notice when you start designing screens and when you're starting looking at the requirements of the features that you need to design for a certain product, that you will be needing more and more things, and it will grow along the way. But what is interesting here is you need to keep it in balance. It cannot have just few basic components and not consider other things, but you can also not design a bunch of components, because the design system also has to be maintained over time. What it means, this maintenance, that every time you create something new, you need to be sure that it's aligned with the styles and with the colors and with the fonts that are already implemented along the design system. So the bigger you make it, the tougher it is to maintain it. So it's kind of like tricky to have a balance. The second example, it's actually from the design system at CodeSpread. The product we have has the characteristic that you can switch from the dark theme to a light theme. because it's a product meant for developers. It's a tool for developers. So they are very used to have a dark mode. But on the other hand, not everyone likes the dark mode. So we needed to have these both themes and the option to switch between them. And in a design system, this is an extra challenge because for every component I needed to create not only every state, but also the same states for the lighter version. So as you can see, I have here the input forms and the states, like what happens when this input form is active, what happened when you write on it, what happened when you type but it's a mistake, like for example in an email validation or in a password validation, these kind of things. And also the same but applied to the light theme. So let's talk about the basics of the design system. By the way, I want to show, besides this, the illustration that I have here, the picture that I have here, is actually the design system for PayPal. And I'm going to share you a few links in the end to see the design systems of big companies like this one. The designer of PayPal has his own portfolio, his own website, and he's sharing all the design process that he did for PayPal, including the design system. And in here, I have the colors for GitHub, if you are familiar with it. And specifically, I took them from their Dribble. I'm going to share also their profile because they share also a lot of their design process and their design system, how they design components. But it's in Dribble, so it's less extensive, let's say. It's just a few examples and they talk a little bit about it, but still I think it's pretty interesting. Okay, so we're going to talk about the basics that you need to have to start a design system. And this should be the reference for the developers, but also for yourself when you start building the rest of the elements. And after this, we're going to talk about why is atomic design, because these basic elements plus the methodology of atomic design is what is going to help you grow in your design system. So of course, the first thing is a color guide. Not necessarily in this order, but it's one of the main things you need to have. For example, this is for CodeSpread. I had our brand color, that is this yellow, with all the possible palettes on how I can use it depending on the contrast I want to achieve. And I have a secondary color that is usually good to have. And there are even companies, for example, here like Github, that they just don't have a primary and a secondary. They have like a full range of colors. This green is their primary color, but they are using a full range of colors because they want it to be very colorful on a dark mode. So in here also, as you can see, I'm choosing the colors I'm going to use as backgrounds for the dark theme and the light theme to make the difference between, for example, the background and the menu bar, and when I design cards or where I am designing, we have a sidebar, for example, and I need to have two versions of this. I need to have the dark theme and the light theme. So I designed the color palettes to be aligned and to have enough color that is good enough for contrast without being excessive. For example, when you are designing a dark mode, one of the good practices is that you don't use a complete black, a full black 00000, because it can be very aggressive to the eye all the time to have this. So you can use colors that are more how to say, like muted in a way. So based on this is how I select these colors. And also for the light theme, even I have a white, basically because I need to create contrast in the black theme. For example, when the dark theme is on, the text is in white, and on the other way it's in the dark color when I have the text. But usually my backgrounds are in these tones of gray to also not have a pure white completely in the screen, because it can be kind of aggressive. If you look, for example, the background of products like Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, you will see that they are not using a fully white. They are using very light tones of gray. And then the others like success, warning, and error I took from here the colors that are default from a Bootstrap, because they already made a whole study about these colors and the contrast they can manage between dark and light themes. So I took the colors, the basic colors from Bootstrap, and then explore with this color palette and ranges that I can use. And after that, I went with fonts. This is not for CodeSpread, this is for the job I previously had, because in CodeSpread we went to something more simple. But the thing is, in my previous work, we had a branded font that is the one on the left. As you can see, it's kind of decorative, but it's not very good when you have plain text or big blocks of text, for example, to read. I don't know, the privacy policy in this, it would be very complicated and not a good user experience. So we needed a more plain sans serif font. So we kept the font for the headers, the one that is kind of branded for headings, but we used another font from Google Fonts to have in the body of text. So we have this balance of being unique with our font, but also make it readable and according to the rules of accessibility. This is the iconography I use currently for CodeSpread. Currently it's still growing. Actually, this I think is kind of outdated, because just this week I added a few more things. But it's basically every time I use a new icon, then I put it here. And what I use for icons usually is I look that there are a bunch of libraries that are ready not only for designers but also for developers. So you need to be aware of what is there, like Material Design, for example, or Font Awesome that I like very much. Or for example, we work a lot with GitHub. So with GitHub, they already have their own library. And for example, if you see here in this example, I took some of the icons from GitHub because we are relating to things you can do with them. Because in our product, there's a way you integrate your GitHub account with our account in our product. So one of the things that is a good practice in the user experience is that you can make people recall rather than remember. So if they are familiar with GitHub because it's for developers and they see these icons that they are already familiar with, then it's easier for them to understand what you are referring to without really showing upfront and writing, okay, this is this and this and this and this is this. For example, a pull request is something very common for developers. If you tell a developer why is a pull request in an icon, they would immediately show is these arrows that are kind of like this, the parallel, the one is going to the left, for example. So I started with some of the icons from the top bar and then from the sidebar, and then along the way when I was designing more pieces or more elements and more components, then I added to this library. As you can see also, I set the standards. What is the minimum size, what is the regular size, and what is the maximum size. So this way, if a developer needs to use an icon in whatever part they are designing, then they will know that they need to use an icon that is 30 pixels, and it cannot be, and if they need to be bigger, they can use 40, but cannot be bigger than that. So that way you are standardizing for them. And another thing that is important is the grid that you are going to use, rather if it's a desktop or mobile, or maybe at some point you will need to use both. But for example, this is very useful for developers because they will understand how to divide the page in CSS with tools like, again, with Bootstrap and CSS Grid, Flexbox, these kind of things, but they will clearly see what is your alignments for the content. For example, in here, what margins you are intending to leave in all the pages. Because, for example, in the tools they use, that for example React, they are able to program that if I said every page is going to have a minimum margin of 80 pixels, then they can make a standard. So every new page they start coding will start with this margins that I already set in design. And then after that comes components that are already part of the interaction, let's say, of the user with the design system. In here we are applying already the colors that I talk about, the fonts, the measures for the buttons. For example, if you can see here, all the buttons have the same size, all of them have the same width, all of them have even things like, for example, one of the things I fight at CodeSpread at the beginning is in the buttons that we're using, sometimes the text in the button was lowercase and higher case, and then everything was uppercase. So we had this inconsistency in design, because when you design a user interface, all the system needs to have the same consistency. So the design system helps us align these kind of things. What I wanted to,
Actually, I have a
yes,
question.
yeah.
Sorry. About the cursors that you have over the hover buttons, did you also customize the cursor that would appear on the website? Or is this going to be standard based on whatever operating system or browser that the user has?
Yeah, in here I didn't consider to personalize the cursor. I just wanted to show
Mhm.
here what is a hover and what is press, that like for them
Oh, okay.
to understand. But also, I mean, if for example, if you are developing or working for a product like us, like it's a web app or something like this, maybe it's not necessary. But for example, people that is in the gaming industry, for example, this is very important for them to have a custom cursor. For example, in this case, you can also design the cursor to have a personalized.
Mhm. Great, thanks.
Okay, now I want to talk about atomic design, and we're going to talk about this guy. His name is Brad Frost, and I don't know what he's doing now, but he's originally a Google developer, and he's the guy who created this methodology of a design system. I'm going to share later his website so you can read about how he started doing this, and well, about the standards of atomic design. He has a book that is called Atomic Design. This that he's holding in the picture is very difficult to find. I tried to find it and to have it for my collection, because I collect the design books, but I haven't succeeded. So, but anyway, in his website, all this information is available. And one of the things he said is when he looked at designs, he kind of talks about how we started relating. For example, in the early stages of the internet, we were talking about pages for the internet because we were familiar with books. So he started thinking about how a page is compound on the internet because it's not similar as a book. So he found out it was more familiar or more related to how in chemistry the components, I mean, like chemical components, are created. If you think about water, for example, you know about the H2O. It's actually, like oxygen, hydrogen, and these things. So for him, this was relatable to how a page in a website is built. And in general, in a product, if you look at an app or a web app, or I don't know, UI, now we found everywhere. Even there are fridge, for example, that you can um, insert information into a fridge, and then it will on the internet, I don't know, for example, tell you that you need to buy milk, these kind of things. Or if you have been to, for example, McDonald's with huge screens that you just press what you want and then you pass your credit card, this is also UI. Because sometimes as designers, we are very focused on a website, for example, or an application where UI is applied in big variety of stuff. So what he noticed is that all these UI user interfaces out there were built from small elements that start building the whole screen that we see, the final page. So we talk about atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages, and we're going to see an example of this. For example, this is for Instagram. So we see here the atoms. We have, for example, the icons or the placeholder for the picture, the text that we add when we post a picture on Instagram, all these things. And then all these small elements gather together to make the molecules and to start giving a little bit of sense to what we are going to build, to the final component that we're building. And then these molecules form organisms. And in here you can see very clear that we have three components. That is the top bar of Instagram, then the component where you have the picture, and then the lower menu. So you have already three organisms, and it's very clear that inside of them there are small atoms living inside. And then these three, when they are working together, they form the template, and every Instagram app on any of our phones is going to look the same. And doesn't matter if we post 1,000 pictures of, if we keep scrolling for 20 minutes, picture after picture, all of them will be standardized, as you can see finally in the page that is created in the final with the dog. So to put a little bit more of examples, I want you to think every time when you enter an app, for example, in your phone, or when you go to a website, or when you watch Netflix, to try to identify all the process of the atoms and the molecules, and then the organisms, and then the templates, and then the big page that we're seeing. For example, if we think about Netflix, we can tell that the pictures of each movie or series that we have is also an atom that is in there working with something else, because we have the picture, and then we have the title, and then we have this thing like if you like or not, or how many episodes it has, how much how many people is viewing, these kind of things. So when we design a product with these standards, like you have already your colors, you have already your typefaces and fonts, you have already a library of icons where you know where taking from, where you know already what is your grid, where you're going to start building your blocks, then the natural step is to start thinking in atomic design. For example, if in this case I want to build the upper menu bar, you need to think, okay, maybe I need here the logo of the brand, or maybe I need here a burger menu, and I need a sign in button, and I need a profile picture icon, and then you start thinking and growing into the designs. Because for example, in here we see elements that are kind of simple, let's say, in a way. For example, these buttons is nothing but the square shape and the text. But if you see, already comes from the standards. If you see, all of them have the same border radius. They are not completely square. They have this round shaped thing, and all of them are the same. And if you look at the next one, the input font for CodeSpread are also not in the same shape as the buttons of the other company, because there are different design systems, but they make sense between them in matters of sizes, in matter of text, how the text is aligned, how the title for this input form is aligned. Okay, so I'm going to pause the presentation because I want to share the links, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. Okay, so this is the website of Brad Frost about atomic design. This is all the story that I was telling you. I mean, I told you in short the phrases about it, but you can deeper into this methodology and to better understand what he's talking about, and he puts many examples of it. So I'm going to share this. Let me see in the chat. We have here chat actually. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the meeting room chat. I
Oh,
actually
okay.
posted a link to Brad Frost's
Oh,
Atomic
okay.
Design Methodologies website, as well as some other stuff that you mentioned in your talk.
Great. Great. Oh, okay. So I will show you also the. This is Nikki van der Water, who is the one who did the redesign from PayPal. So if you see the old versions of PayPal, they are available still in Google if you look for them. You will see the difference between what he's doing, his job, his standards that he did. For example, for the buttons, if you can see here, doesn't matter if it's a white background or if it's a blue background, all the buttons are same shape, same size, fonts are same style also.
Oh, can you share the link to the PayPal design system?
Yes, sure. Where do I share it?
Yeah, it's in the meeting room chat. I
Okay.
pinged you.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little bit hard to find. If you scroll up, it's in the same category as voice chat. So there's two text channels with like emojis with hands.
Okay. I'm trying to find it. Okay, I find you, so I want to share it with you, and if you can help me share it.
Oh, okay. Alrighty. I could
Okay.
do that. Thank you.
Okay, and the next one is Spotify Design. We are all familiar with Spotify, but what I like about them is the design team at Spotify, they have specifically the website of how they build all the design stuff that they're working on. So you can see here, I don't know, things that are working. For example, this is what I talk about the fridge. Now the UI of the fridge is going to have Spotify. But they have, for example, all the methodology they use to build the components. For example, this design principles, and they have a lot of interesting stuff here in Spotify design. I'm going to share also the dribble from a GitHub. And what I like about them is that with their design system, they created already a culture of its own. For example, these icons that I was talking about, these are posters that they are selling in their webpage. Why? Because the developers feel very connected to this product and feel very identified with the design system that they created. So there's actually people that wants to have these icons in their house, in their walls as a decoration. For example, this is what I'm talking about. For if you tell a developer about pull request, he will understand this is a very inside joke kind of thing. For
Oh,
example,
are you doing like a share screen of your browser?
yes.
Or are you Oh, okay, because we can't see the screen. Right now we just see the slides.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah. So Discord, you gotta click on the icon that says screen, and
Oh,
then you
okay,
switch
okay.
your screens.
Ah, so you didn't see also the Facebook, the
Yeah.
Spotify. Okay. Let me see.
And I will share some of these links in the chat. By the way, guys, are you able to see the links in the chat? Yep. So Tech says yes, Sunny D is okay. Okay,
Okay, so
cool.
again,
Yeah, now we can see your screen,
okay, so again, I was talking about
your browser screen. Yeah.
Spotify design.
Hmm.
This is PayPal. I was talking about how all, for example, I put the example of the buttons, how all of them
Hmm.
are aligned to a certain style.
Hmm.
Spotify design that I shared already, how they build the design system. Um, and they have something very interesting here that is uh, design principles that is also related. It's not really part of the design system, but in a way, the design principles affect the design system in a way. Like for example, why they choose the colors they are using right now, why they're using the iconography they are using right now. And about GitHub, I was telling, for example, about the pull request. It's something that is very in the language of GitHub, and developers feel very familiar with it. So for example, this arrow like this, they know what is this about. So one of the things I wanted to use is all this language that they already created into our design system, so developers will be familiar with them. And they have a bunch of things about design, like the colors. For example, this is the color palette that they are using in their product. They have a wide range of colors to use from. Other things that they are sharing here, for example, I mean, they share all kind of designs, but they are sharing even, for example, their wireframing for some of their pages, and they're using how they design the components, for example. If we talk about design system, we can see that we have here an atom that will be the icon, and then is part of all this section or this tab working along with the text and another icon, and then it's part of something else, and then part of something bigger, just as we saw with the design system. Okay, so basically this is what I wanted to show, and I want to share also with you this book that I showed in the beginning about InVision. So I will invite you to sign up at the list that I have. I'm not spamming anyone, I promise. I hate spam also as much as everyone else. But usually when I give these talks, usually I share material like now. And if you are in the list, it's easier for me to send an email to everyone instead of doing like by hand manually. So I'm going to share the link if you want to sign up and receive this PDF. Let me find again the chat. Okay, but meanwhile, this was all of the presentation. If you have any questions about design systems, and not necessarily related to design system, but to UI design in general.
Do you guys have any questions for Aldo?
Yeah, hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was trying to implement a design system, or I was about to at my last job, but one of the things I ran into was that my bosses were like, it was a very small design agency, and they were like, we're not going to be able to do this unless we dedicate a developer to work with you. Do you have any suggestions of how to work with like developers on a design system and in a using a particular framework for development? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, for example, I can tell you my experience with this company I'm working for. As I said, they first hired developers and they hired the designer after. So what happened is that they took things that were already made from they work with React. So they are the basic library from React, and they were using things from there, but there were things like the colors or the accessibility or the contrast that was not very good. So what is happening now is that they are implementing the designs that I did, but there are still things that are the older versions. So if you go to not the website, because it's one of the things that they built last, but if you go to the product per se, you will see that one page is with the old design and what is with the new one. So of course, this means that to change it, as you said, you will need a developer that is focused only on redesigning according to the design system. The thing is, most of the companies don't want that because developers are expensive and usually they are creating new stuff. So what we can do, this is what I'm doing actually, is we're going to have like a starting point. Every new function is going to be according to the standards of the design system and created, and everything that is old we will be changing over time. It cannot be done, I don't know, in 1 week or in 1 month, because for this you will need a designer specifically to sit with you with all this. And what I recommend is that to know which tools the developers are using already. Maybe instead of looking for icons over the internet and wasting 2 hours looking for the best ones, they're already working with the material design for React, for example. And material design has already an icon library. So whatever you think will save time for you and also for them, this is a good start. And whatever you think is more important, maybe there are, as I said, the design system is a teacher, not a police. So maybe what you think is most important or more relevant to start changing in the product you already have and you want to implement. Maybe, I don't know, the buttons along the product are not standardized. One is purple and rounded, and then the next one is green and square. If this is something that is happening, it's more relevant than, for example, I don't know, something that can be less relevant, like if the links you want them to be in a specific tone of blue, and now it's just the regular HTML blue, for just to give an example. So what I would recommend is that you start implementing the design system in slow steps, because it's going to take time and it's going to take man-force to do it. And you need to convince people that this is the way to go, because for the user experience, it makes a big difference to have a designer that designed a design system with standards, with accessibility on color contrast, on readability of the text, and these kind of things.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Sunny D also has a question. She typed this in the chats.
Yeah.
She asked, what are the biggest differences between style guides and design systems?
The style guide has, for example, the colors, things related to more like to the brand, like for example this branded font that I showed. But the style guide doesn't have components. In the end, a design system considers the components. A style guide is part of the design system, because usually if you're working with a brand, let's say, for example, this brand I was working is a very old brand, and they're starting to go digital. They built a marketplace, but there were things that were already with them for a long time, like the logo, the colors of the logo, the font they were using for their advertising, these kind of things. They had a brand style, a guide style of the brand. And this needed to be also in the design system. But for example, this brand style, the brand style was not considering, for example, the state of what happened if an input form has a validation of an email and the email is incorrect, for example. So this is mainly the difference. The design system has the components and considers the different states. A style guide doesn't. A style guide considers things like the colors, the fonts, I don't know, maybe some iconography that you are already using in some other stuff, this kind of thing.
Okie I also have a question.
Yes.
When it comes to where style guides exist, because we know what it is, what's contained with them, but where do we save this kind of information? Is it usually on Figma, or like you said, you mostly work with developers, so it would be on GitHub. But a lot of people here are also not coders. So is there other ways for designers to create style systems, and what tools are available?
Well, there's a wide variety of tools. If you do it in Figma, it's useful. Like, you have the files where you are designing, but you also need to have all the files in your design system. Like, create a specific file for the design system. And even if it's possible, because now, for example, in CodeSpread, we are starting to work on the mobile app. So I have a file for all the components for the web product, but I have another file for the mobile. And of course, there are things that are related to are the same. But for example, I cannot use the same button in the web and the same one in the mobile because of the sizes of the screens. But I have specific library of components, and this is what I share with the developers. Of course, we have the Github that they're familiar with, and I have other documentation that is more like for me, because I'm also thinking in the future, in I don't know, few years, when the design team grows, and it's not only me, I need to show to other designers what is the design system. Or if at some point I change to another company, then CodeSpread needs to still use they're still going to use this design system, still going to make it grow. So there's a part of documentation that you can use, for example, for this kind of thing that is more, let's say, designer talk. We have Zeppelin. We have InVision, for example, has a tool like this that is basically documenting the design systems and is creating these standards. Developers can use them also, but they are more familiar to things like GitHub, or basically just take the Figma, because Figma has very good information for developers regarding the CSS. It has, for example, the colors the X colors you are using. I don't know, specific information regarding the coding in CSS. And there are tools like Anima App, which is actually a plugin for Sketch and Figma. I think there's also for InVision. Anima App, for example, lets you design a component, and then the paid version, of course, the free is just doing animations and these kind of things, but the paid version, for example, you create a component, and Anima App, what it does, it creates a complete code in React. So developers, what need to do is just take this code and put it into what they are building. Because React works basically like Figma. You create a component, and you can reuse the same component all along the system.
Okay. I've also used the app called Zeppelin. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, this is what I mentioned before. Yeah, Zeppelin is very good for documenting. I think developers doesn't like it that much. I think it's very much, it's more like for designers, and it has like very design vibe kind of thing, but it's great for documenting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, what about Notion?
Notion, to be honest, I'm not familiar with it. I heard about it, but to be honest, I'm not familiar. I haven't worked with it. But I work with the Zeppelin currently and with Figma, and we have a Confluence that is basically an Excel table kind of thing, but the Jira version. And I put in there all the documentation if they want to see colors, if they want to see styles of fonts, if they want to see all the library of the components, all the library of the buttons, these kind of things.
Okay. That's very cool. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Aldo? And if you're not able to unmute, you could always type your question into the meeting room chat. Any more questions?
Actually, yeah, I guess. May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Of course.
Can you, within like Zeppelin, can you give some suggestions for best practices when documenting your components and design system?
Yes, one of the best practices, first of all, it will save you a lot of time. They have a plugin that interacts with Figma. So if you already created this documentation in Figma, or if you already, the plugin, what it does is, let's say you have a page and you already created components in Figma with its variables, then Zeppelin will take all this and you just need to categorize. Let's say I have my document of the buttons, then I just need to select and push into Zeppelin, and then in Zeppelin say, okay, all of these are my buttons with the different variations of the buttons, for example. This will save a lot of time. The plugin is very useful. And another good practice that is not only for Zeppelin, but for example, I would recommend to separate by, for example, if by project, the scope of the project. For example, the components you are using for the biggest scope can be mobile and web. so you will have separate and not confuse people when they enter and they see just like there is a big project with thousands of components and nothing is very clear. So be very organized in the scope of each project. This is mobile, this is web. For example, one of the things we had at CodeSpread is that we are iterating all the time with the cards of the users, for example, how you select the users. So for me, one of the important scopes is to save all the versions, because since I started in this company the 1st of February, and so it's going to be, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months. And in this time, we already have 12 versions of this same component. So one of the things I do, because sometimes it happens that you remember in this card we had this thing, this information that we erased, but we thought that maybe it's relevant, so we should put it back. So these kind of things happen. So one of the good practices I do in Zeppelin is a company like this that is iterating all the time and is making versions. I'm always documenting the versions of it, and I always have also the Figma file ready to know. Okay, you are talking about version 6. So let me go into Zeppelin. I can show you here. This is what you're talking about. Okay, now I have my Figma file, and then I can recover this and made again the version 13 that is including something from version 6. So versioning is very important also, and it's a very good practice.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay, any more questions? No, everyone is
Yeah, it
already
seems
expert.
like it seems like that's all the questions that we have
Great.
for Aldo today. Yeah, thank you very much, Aldo, for leading this chat. It was very interesting and insightful. I learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure everyone else did. As for the recording, if you could just send it to me by email or whether it's a Dropbox link or whatever, Google
Sure.
Drive, that'll be great. I'll upload it to